I'm Madison, 32 years old, a nurse drowning in student loan debt. Yet somehow I became my family's personal ATM. They borrowed thousands, made promises, and broke everyone. But when I told them I'd lost my job and needed help, they all turned their backs. Except for one woman I've always admired. What they didn't know was this was just my small test. One that would expose the subtle, manipulative truth hiding behind the word family. Before I tell you what I discovered, let me take you back to who I was before that life-changing Friday night. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an ICU nurse at Denver General Hospital. Well, worked. More on that later. My life was pretty ordinary. 12-hour shifts, 4 days a week, making about $65,000 a year. I lived in a studio apartment in Aurora that cost me $1,400 a month, which left me with just enough to get by if I was careful. And I was always careful. I had to be. Between my $37,000 in student loans from nursing school and the reality of living paycheck to paycheck, every dollar mattered. I drove a 2014 Toyota Camry with 180,000 miles on it. The air conditioning only worked half the time, and it made this weird clicking noise whenever it rained. But it got me to work and back. My grocery budget was $80 a week, and I meal prepped every Sunday like my life depended on it. Which honestly, it kind of did. If I was lucky, I had maybe $200 in my emergency fund at any given time. That's not much of an emergency fund. But when you're paying off student loans and trying to keep a roof over your head, savings become more of a dream than a reality. But here's the thing about my family. They always seem to think I had it figured out. Maybe because I'm a nurse, maybe because I never complained much. But somehow I became the family bank. And let me introduce you to this wonderful cast of characters, because understanding them is crucial to what comes next. My parents, David and Linda, divorced when I was 16. Dad's a construction foreman who makes about $75,000 a year, but he's terrible with money, always has been. He remarried Jennifer, a dental hygienist, who's got expensive taste and an even more expensive attitude toward anyone who isn't contributing to her lifestyle. Mom remarried Robert, an insurance agent who makes decent money but treats me like I'm some kind of burden he inherited when he married into the family. Then there's my siblings. Tyler, my older brother, is 35 and still figuring out his life. He calls himself a musician, and I use that term loosely, who works part-time at a coffee shop downtown and has turned asking family for money into an art form. Seriously, this guy could write a masterclass on emotional manipulation. My sister Emma is 28, works in marketing, and lives this Instagram-perfect life in a trendy downtown apartment that she definitely can't afford on her $52,000 salary. But the person who's different from all of them is my Aunt Susan. She's my mom's sister, 49 years old, and works as a librarian at the public library. She makes maybe $38,000 a year, drives a 2010 Honda Civic that makes concerning noises when she starts it, and lives in a tiny apartment filled with books and plants. But Susan has something the rest of my family lacks. A genuine heart and the kind of integrity that seems to be missing from everyone else's DNA. Now let me tell you about my history with family financial requests, because this is absolutely crucial for understanding what comes later. This isn't just about one or two incidents. This is a pattern that's been going on for years. 3 years ago, Tyler called me at 2 a.m, crying because he was going to be evicted if he didn't come up with $3,000 by the end of the week. He spun this whole story about how his roommate had bailed on him, how he'd been spending all his money on music equipment for his big break, and how he just needed this one loan to get back on his feet. I emptied my entire savings account to help him. Did I ever see that money again? What do you think? 6 months later, I saw photos of him at South by Southwest, Coachella, and at least 3 expensive music festivals on Instagram. When I asked about the money, he said he was working on it and would definitely get me back next month. 2 years ago, Emma needed $1,800 for what she called an emergency. She was crying on the phone, talking about how she might lose her apartment, how work was slow, how she just needed help to get through a rough patch. I put it on my credit card because I didn't have cash, and she promised to pay me back after her next promotion. The emergency turned out to be wanting to go to Coachella with her influencer friends because it would be good for her personal brand. I'm still paying interest on that credit card debt. Last year, my dad called with truck troubles. His work truck had broken down and he needed $2,000 for repairs, or he'd lose his job. This felt legitimate. The man's been working construction for 30 years, and his truck is his livelihood. I sent him the money within an hour. The next month, I saw photos on Facebook of him and Jennifer on a 7-day cruise to the Caribbean. When I asked about it, he said, "We'd already booked it, Madison. We couldn't just lose the money." Apparently, my $2,000 had freed up their vacation fund. There were smaller incidents too. Mom needed $400 for car repairs. That turned out to be wanting new rims. Robert asked for $600 to help with utilities during a month when they'd spent $1,200 on a weekend trip to Vegas. Emma borrowed $300 for groceries and posted pictures of a $150 dinner the same night. The only person who ever helped me was Susan. When I was struggling through nursing school, working nights at a 24-hour diner and barely making rent, she showed up at my apartment with bags of groceries and a check for $500. She said, "Education is the one thing nobody can take away from you, honey. This is an investment in your future." I later found out she'd been eating ramen noodles for 6 weeks to save that money for me. When I tried to pay her back after graduation, she refused. "You just pay it forward someday," she said. "So that's my family. I love them because they're family, but I'd learned not to expect much from them." Which brings me to my one small indulgence, lottery tickets. Every Friday after work, I'd stop at the Quick Mart on Colfax Avenue and buy $10 worth of tickets. It was my tiny rebellion against financial responsibility, my small dose of hope in an otherwise predictable life. My family loved to make fun of this habit. "Madison's throwing money away again," Tyler would joke, usually right before asking me for another loan. "It's a tax on people who can't do math," my dad would lecture, conveniently forgetting his own gambling problem with fantasy football leagues. "You should just give me that $10 directly," Emma would say. At least then someone in the family would benefit. But there was something hopeful about those tickets. A tiny chance at freedom that I couldn't give up, even though the most I'd ever won was $20 here and there over the years. The night everything changed was actually after one of the worst shifts of my life. We'd lost 2 patients in the ICU, an elderly man who'd been fighting cancer for months, and a young mother who'd been in a car accident. I'd been on my feet for 14 hours straight, hadn't eaten a real meal, and was questioning whether I was emotionally strong enough for this job. The weight of watching people die, of comforting families in their worst moments, sometimes felt like too much to bear. I stopped at Quick Mart like always, but this time felt different. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe it was some kind of premonition, but instead of doing my usual quick pick, I decided to choose my own numbers. I chose 7 for my birth month of July, 23 for Tyler's birthday on the 23rd, 31 for Emma's birthday, 42 for my dad's birthday, 18 for my mom's birthday, and 9 for Susan's birthday on the 9th. 6 numbers representing the most important people in my life, even the ones who disappointed me over and over again. I got home around midnight, heated up some leftover pizza that had been sitting in my fridge for 3 days, and settled onto my secondhand couch with a glass of cheap wine. The lottery drawing was at 8, but I'd recorded it like always. I pulled up the numbers on my phone while barely paying attention, expecting nothing as usual. The first number appeared, 7. I smiled a little, thinking about the coincidence. Second number, 23. My heart rate picked up just a bit. 2 matches was pretty good. Third number, 31. Now I was sitting up straight, actually paying attention. Fourth number, 42. My palms were starting to sweat, and I could hear my heart beat in my ears. Fifth number, 18. I was holding my breath, staring at my phone screen like it might change if I blinked. Sixth and final number, 9. I stared at my phone for what felt like forever. This couldn't be right. I must have read something wrong, or maybe the website was glitching. I checked again. And again, I cleared my browser cache and checked a different website. Same numbers. I turned on the TV and rewound to the live drawing, watching in complete disbelief as each of my numbers appeared on the screen one after another. "No way," I whispered to my empty apartment. "No freaking way." I checked the lottery website for winners. 1 ticket sold in Colorado. 1 winner. Me. According to every source I could find, I was the sole winner of $52 million. After federal and state taxes, it would be somewhere around $31 million. An unfathomable amount for someone who'd been excited about finding a dollar in her jeans pocket earlier that week. I didn't sleep at all that night. I couldn't. Instead, I spent hours on my laptop researching lottery winners, and what I found was absolutely terrifying. Story after story of winners whose lives fell apart after their windfall. Families torn apart by greed and jealousy. Friends and distant relatives crawling out of the woodwork with sob stories and outstretched hands. Winners who were bankrupt within 5 years, more miserable than before they'd won. One article was titled, "The Lottery, the Quickest Path to Losing Everything You Care About." Another detailed how lottery winners become targets, not just for scammers and criminals, but for their own families. People who'd never shown interest in their lives suddenly became very concerned about their well-being, their happiness, their future plans. I read about a woman in Florida who won $30 million and ended up estranged from her entire family after they sued her for not sharing fairly. A man in Texas who won $18 million and had to get a restraining order against his own brother. A couple in Ohio who won $45 million and divorced within 2 years because of fights over how to spend it. The statistics were even worse. 70% of lottery winners go bankrupt within 5 years. 40% of winners report being less happy after winning than before. Family relationships deteriorate in 85% of cases. As the sun rose over Denver, painting my small apartment in golden light, I made my decision. I would claim the money, but I wouldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I needed time to process this, to make a plan, to understand what this money would mean for my life, before everyone else tried to tell me what to do with it. That morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years and spent 3 hours on Google looking for lawyers who specialized in lottery winners. I found Patricia Hendricks, an attorney whose website talks specifically about privacy protection for sudden wealth recipients. Her office was in a downtown high-rise that made me feel completely out of place. "Miss Parker," Patricia greeted me when I finally worked up the courage to walk into her office. She was in her 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and kind eyes behind expensive glasses. "What can I help you with today?" My hands were shaking as I placed the ticket on her mahogany desk. "I need to know how to claim this without anyone finding out it was me." Her eyes widened briefly as she examined the ticket. Then she nodded with the professionalism of someone who'd seen this before. "I see. Well, you've definitely come to the right place." Over the next 2 hours, Patricia explained my options in detail. In Colorado, lottery winners could claim prizes through trusts or limited liability companies that would keep their identities completely private. She outlined the process of setting up a blind trust, how taxes would work, the importance of assembling a team of financial advisors, and the legal protections available to winners who wanted to maintain anonymity. "The biggest mistake winners make," she told me, "is telling too many people too quickly. Once that information gets out, there's no putting it back in the bottle. You become a target for everyone: family, friends, strangers, scammers, criminals. Your life as you know it ends." I nodded, relieved that my instinct for secrecy had been correct. "I want to do this right. I don't want this money to ruin my life." "Smart thinking. We'll set up the Parker Family Trust, claim the winnings through that entity, and establish a comprehensive investment strategy. You'll be able to access funds as needed, but the bulk of your wealth will be protected and growing." Over the next 2 weeks, I worked with Patricia and her team to establish the trust, claim the winnings, and set up investment accounts with a major firm that specialized in managing sudden wealth. We created a comprehensive financial plan that would ensure I'd never have to worry about money again, even if I lived to be 150. The money was real now, sitting in accounts under my control, generating more in daily interest than I used to make in a month. Yet my day-to-day life remained completely unchanged. I still went to work, still complained about bills with coworkers, still drove my old Camry with its broken air conditioning. The secrecy was starting to weigh on me, but I knew I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. But gradually, an idea began to form in my mind. What if there was a way to find out how my family would react to my newfound wealth without actually revealing it? What if I could test their character, their true feelings about me, before deciding who deserved to share in my secret? The plan crystallized one sleepless night as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I would create a scenario where I desperately needed financial help. Not a huge amount, but enough to be significant. I would approach each family member individually with the same story, the same request, and see who would actually step up to help me without the prospect of gaining anything in return. Only then would I know who truly cared about me versus who saw me as a convenient resource. I decided to share my plan with my best friend, Casey Rodriguez. Casey and I had been roommates in nursing school, and she was one of the few people I trusted completely. She worked in the pediatric ICU at the same hospital and understood financial struggle in a way most people didn't. We met at our usual coffee spot after a particularly brutal shift. Casey took one look at my face and knew something was up. "Okay, spill it," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks." "I'm thinking about conducting a sort of experiment with my family," I began carefully, not sure how to explain without revealing everything. Casey raised an eyebrow. "What kind of experiment? Please tell me this isn't about trying to fix your parents' marriage or something equally insane." I took a deep breath. "I'm going to tell them I lost my job and need financial help, just to see who actually cares enough to help me when I need it." Casey's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. "Madison, that seems really manipulative. Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired of being the only one who helps when others need it," I said, unable to meet her eyes. "I want to know who would actually be there for me if the tables were turned for once." "But lying to test people? That doesn't sound like you at all," Casey said, setting down her coffee cup. "Why not just have an honest conversation with them about how you feel?" I laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Right, because my family is so great at honest conversations. You know how they are, Casey. You've watched them treat me like a personal ATM for years." "I know, but still, this feels wrong. What are you really trying to prove here?" "I'm not trying to prove anything," I insisted, though that wasn't entirely true. "I just want to know who actually cares about me as a person, versus who sees me as a resource to be tapped whenever they need money." Casey shook her head slowly. "I think you're going to hurt yourself more than anyone else with this plan. But I know that look in your eye. You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" She was absolutely right. I had spent the previous night crafting my story, making sure it was believable, but not so dramatic that it would raise suspicion or seem like I was fishing for sympathy. I would tell everyone that Denver General was downsizing due to budget cuts from the state, and several nurses in my department had been laid off, including me. I would say I needed $6,000 to cover rent and some outstanding medical bills until I could find a new position. It was a significant amount, but not outrageous, and certainly not beyond the means of most of my family members. $6,000 represented about 3 months of my current rent, which seemed reasonable for someone genuinely struggling to find new employment in a competitive field. I made a detailed list of everyone I would approach: my dad, David, and stepmom Jennifer, my mom Linda, and stepdad Robert, my sister Emma, my brother Tyler, and my aunt Susan. 7 people, all of whom had turned to me for help at some point over the years, all of whom I had supported either financially or emotionally when they needed it. I even made predictions about how each person would respond. Based on years of experience with their personalities and priorities, my mom would probably express initial sympathy, but then deflect responsibility to someone else. My dad would lecture me about financial responsibility, but might offer a token amount with strings attached. Jennifer would refuse outright and probably make it about my poor life choices. Robert would bluntly say it wasn't his problem. Emma would claim she was broke despite her expensive lifestyle. Tyler would promise help that would never materialize, then disappear until the crisis passed. The only person I had any real hope for was Aunt Susan. Despite having the least disposable income of anyone in my family, she had always been the most generous with what little she had. But even with her, I tried to keep my expectations low. $6,000 was a massive amount for a public librarian living alone on $38,000 a year. I decided to start with my dad. David had always prided himself on being the practical one in the family, frequently lecturing all of us kids about the importance of financial planning and responsibility. If anyone would help a family member in genuine need, I thought it might be him, even if it came with a healthy dose of "I told you so." My hands were actually trembling when I dialed his number after his work shift on Tuesday evening. He answered on the second ring, sounding tired but alert. "Hey, Dad," I said, intentionally putting strain and worry into my voice. "Madison, everything okay? You sound really upset about something." I launched into my carefully prepared story, telling him about the hospital downsizing, the sudden layoffs, and my increasingly desperate financial situation. As I spoke, I could hear his breathing change, becoming more focused and concerned with each detail I provided. "Jesus, that's terrible, honey," he said when I finished. "I had no idea the hospital was in that kind of trouble. Have you applied for unemployment benefits? What about your emergency fund?" I explained that unemployment would take at least 4 to 6 weeks to process and start paying out, and that my emergency fund had been completely depleted by some recent medical tests and procedures. I deliberately didn't specify what the medical issues were, allowing his imagination to fill in the potentially scary blanks. "I hate to ask this, Dad, and you know I wouldn't if I wasn't desperate, but I need help. About $6,000 to cover rent and medical bills until I can find something new. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as I'm working again." There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice had shifted into what I had always called his teacher mode. The tone he used when he was about to deliver a lesson about life. "Madison, this is exactly why I've always told you kids to save at least 6 months of expenses for emergencies. What happened to building up that safety net? This is a perfect example of why you need to live below your means and plan for unexpected situations." For the next 20 minutes, he delivered a detailed lecture about budgeting, emergency preparedness, the importance of multiple income streams, and the current job market for healthcare workers. He suggested I look into temporary nursing agencies, consider moving to a cheaper apartment, maybe get a roommate to split costs. Not once during this entire monologue did he offer any actual financial help. "Look, I'd love to help you out, Madison," he finally said. "But Jennifer and I are right in the middle of refinancing the house to get a better rate. We've got all our cash tied up in that process, and we can't afford to touch our savings right now. Maybe I could swing $500, but you'd need to treat it as a real loan, with interest and a payment schedule. This needs to be a learning experience for you." $500, with interest. From a man who'd borrowed $2,000 from me for truck repairs just a year ago and had never paid back a cent. From a man who'd just spent God knows how much on a Caribbean cruise. I thanked him as graciously as I could manage and hung up, immediately writing down his response in a journal I'd started specifically for this experiment. $500 with conditions and a lecture about financial responsibility. From someone who owed me money and had terrible financial habits himself. The next day, I called my mom during her lunch break from substitute teaching. Linda had always positioned herself as the more emotionally supportive parent, the one who truly cared about her children's well-being and happiness. "Hi, Mom," I said, putting the same worried strain in my voice that I'd used with Dad. "Oh, honey, is everything all right? You sound absolutely terrible." I gave her the exact same story about losing my job and needing help with rent and medical bills. Her initial reaction was much more sympathetic and nurturing than my dad's had been. "Oh, sweetheart, that's just awful," she said, and I could hear genuine distress in her voice. "These hospitals don't care about their employees at all anymore. It's all about profit margins and corporate greed. Have you talked to your father about this? What about Emma? She's doing so well with her marketing job. And Paul has that good position at the insurance company." I was hoping to avoid asking Dad if possible, I said truthfully. "And Emma has her own expenses with that new apartment and everything." "Well, let me talk to Robert tonight and see what we might be able to do," she said. But I could already hear the deflection creeping into her voice. "You know how tight money has been lately with his medical issues and all the specialist visits we've been dealing with." I knew for a fact that Robert's medical issues consisted of routine annual checkups and a mild prescription for high blood pressure that was completely covered by his excellent insurance through work. Just last week, my mom had posted photos on Facebook from their long weekend trip to Aspen, complete with pictures of expensive dinners and resort activities. "I'm sure we could help with something," she continued. "Maybe $300 or so? But you should definitely talk to Jennifer first. She makes really good money at that dental practice, and they don't have any kids to worry about." $300 from a woman who'd spent more than that on a single spa day the month before, according to her own social media posts. from someone who was suggesting I ask my stepmother, who barely tolerated my existence, before acknowledging any real responsibility to help her own daughter. I thanked her and hung up, adding her response to my growing journal of disappointments. Jennifer's reaction was exactly what I'd expected, but it still stung when I actually heard it. When I called the dental office where she worked and explained my situation, her voice immediately became cold and condescending. "Madison, you're 32 years old. This is exactly why people your age need to learn real financial responsibility, instead of expecting others to bail them out every time life gets difficult." She went on to suggest that this was probably a good learning opportunity for me, that maybe I should consider whether nursing was really the right career path if I couldn't handle the instability, and that I might want to think about moving back in with one of my parents until I got back on my feet. She didn't offer a single dollar, not one. "Perhaps this will teach you the importance of proper financial planning," she concluded. "Maybe you should look into getting a roommate or moving to a cheaper neighborhood." This from a woman who spent more on her monthly manicures than I spent on groceries. Robert was even more direct when I reached him at his insurance office the next day. He didn't even pretend to care about my situation. "Madison, I'm going to be straight with you," he said in the flat, businesslike tone he used for everything. "You're not my daughter. I've been supporting your mother for 8 years now, but your financial problems are your responsibility, not mine. I didn't create this situation, so I'm not going to be the one to fix it." When I mentioned that I'd helped family members before when they needed it, he cut me off. "That was your choice. Nobody forced you to give money to people. If you made poor financial decisions in the past, that doesn't create an obligation for me to make the same mistakes." No help, no sympathy, no acknowledgement that I was even part of his extended family. Tyler was perhaps the most disappointing of all, and that's saying something given my already low expectations. Instead of calling him directly, I sent a detailed text message explaining my situation, hoping he might respond with at least some concern or offer to talk about it. His reply came 4 hours later. "Sis, that sucks so bad, really tight right now myself. Band equipment wiped me out this month. Maybe next month when things settle down. Hang in there." I sent follow-up messages asking if we could at least talk on the phone, if he had any suggestions for job hunting, if he knew anyone in healthcare who might be hiring. All of my messages went unanswered. Meanwhile, his Instagram stories showed him at expensive craft breweries, concert venues, and restaurants around Denver over the next several days. This was the same brother who'd borrowed $3,000 from me less than a year ago with promises to pay it back as soon as the music thing takes off. The same brother who'd cried on the phone about being evicted and homeless if I didn't help him immediately. Emma's response was delivered via FaceTime while she sat in what looked like an upscale restaurant downtown. A cocktail that probably cost $15 sitting in front of her. "OMG, Madison, that's like so totally awful," she said. But she seemed more distracted by her own reflection on the screen than concerned about my situation. "I literally can't even imagine how stressful that must be for you right now." When I asked if she might be able to help with even a portion of what I needed, her expression shifted to something almost resembling panic. "I totally wish I could help, babe, but I'm literally saving every penny for my Europe trip next month. My career coach says I absolutely have to invest in experiences and personal branding opportunities if I want to advance in marketing. Plus, I just signed up for this amazing photography workshop in Tuscany that's going to completely transform my Instagram presence." She offered to Venmo me $100, as if that token gesture would make any meaningful difference in covering $6,000 worth of expenses. This from someone who regularly posted pictures of $150 dinners and designer purchases. "Maybe you could ask Tyler," she suggested. "Or what about Aunt Susan? She's always been really good about family stuff." By the end of the week, word had somehow spread through the family grapevine, despite my specifically asking everyone to keep my situation private. A group text conversation that I wasn't included in had apparently become a forum for discussing my financial irresponsibility and poor planning. Jennifer had told several family members that I was calling around begging for handouts from everyone. Tyler, who hadn't even bothered to respond to my follow-up messages, was apparently telling people that he'd offered to help, but I'd been too proud to accept his assistance. I was emotionally exhausted and had confirmed my worst fears about my family. 7 people who had repeatedly asked for and received my help over the years, couldn't or wouldn't return the favor when I genuinely needed them. The experiment had been more painful than I'd expected, even though the results weren't particularly surprising. Then on Friday evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Susan's name. "Madison, honey, I just heard from your mother about what happened with your job. Are you doing okay?" Her voice was warm with genuine concern and worry. I hadn't actually planned to contact Susan yet. She was going to be my final call, partly because I was afraid of being disappointed by the one person I actually had hope for. "I'm hanging in there," I said. And for the first time all week, the emotion in my voice was entirely real. "Listen, I want to help however I can. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" My treat, of course. "I think we should talk about this in person." The next day we met at Rosie's Diner, a small family-owned place near her apartment, where we used to meet regularly when I was struggling through nursing school. Susan looked exactly as she always did. Silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a cardigan with mismatched buttons that she'd probably owned for 10 years. She hugged me tightly before we even sat down. "I'm so sorry about your job, sweetheart. That hospital never deserves someone as dedicated as you anyway." As we ate lunch, she asked thoughtful, specific questions about my job search, my financial situation, and my plans for the future. She offered to reach out to some former colleagues who had connections in healthcare, suggested specific nursing agencies that might have temporary positions, and gave me practical advice about unemployment benefits and job interview strategies. But more than that, she listened, really listened, without judgment, without lectures about what I should have done differently, without making it about her own opinions or experiences. Then, after our plates had been cleared and we were sitting over coffee, she reached into her purse and pulled out a white envelope. "I want you to take this," she said, sliding it across the table toward me. I stared at the envelope, suddenly afraid to open it. "Susan, I can't take money from you. You work so hard for everything you have. Just open it," she said gently. "Please." Inside was $4,500 in cash. $4,500. I felt tears welling up in my eyes as the reality of what she'd done hit me. "I know it's not the full $6,000 you need," she said quietly, "but it should cover your rent for the next few months at least. That'll give you time to find something good instead of having to take the first job that comes along." "Susan, this is way too much. I can't possibly accept this." "Nonsense. Family helps family, and I want you to know something else." She reached across the table and took my hand in both of hers. "If you need a place to stay to save money on rent, my couch pulls out into a bed. It's not fancy, and the apartment's pretty small, but you're welcome to stay as long as you need to get back on your feet." I was crying openly now, completely overwhelmed by her generosity and kindness. This woman who made less money than anyone else in my family, who drove a car that was barely holding together, who shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons religiously, had just given me more help than everyone else combined. "And don't you worry about paying this back right away," she continued. "Get yourself settled first. Find a job you actually like this time. Life's too short to work somewhere that doesn't appreciate you and treat you right." Driving home that afternoon, I clutched the envelope containing $4,500, money that I later discovered represented virtually all of Susan's savings. Through some discreet research over the following days, I learned that she'd been struggling with the costs of diabetes medication that wasn't fully covered by her insurance, and had recently taken on a second job, tutoring elementary school kids after work to make ends meet. She'd given me everything she had. Everything. The contrast between Susan's response and everyone else's couldn't have been more stark or more revealing. The only person who had offered genuine, substantial, no-strings-attached help was the one with the least ability to afford it. The person who'd made the greatest sacrifice was the one who could least afford to make any sacrifice at all. That night, I made a decision that had been building all week. I called Susan and asked if she'd like to come over for dinner the following evening. I spent the entire next day cooking her favorite meal, homemade lasagna with garlic bread and a Caesar salad. And as we sat on my small balcony with glasses of wine, watching the sunset over the Denver skyline, I knew I had to tell her the truth. All of it. "Susan, I need to tell you something really important, and I'm honestly terrified you're going to hate me for it." Her expression remained open and patient, waiting for me to continue without rushing or judging. I didn't lose my job. The hospital is fine, and I'm still working there full-time. I made up the whole story because I wanted to see who in our family would actually help me if I really needed it. Susan was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd just told her. Then she nodded slowly, thoughtfully. I see. And what did you learn from this experiment? Are you angry with me? I asked, suddenly terrified of losing the one genuine relationship I'd discovered through this whole painful process. She considered the question carefully before answering. No, I'm not angry. Sad, maybe. Sad that you felt like you needed to test people this way. That our family has made you feel so uncertain about where you stand with everyone. She took a sip of her wine and continued. But I understand why you did it. Our family hasn't always been very kind to you, Madison. I've watched them take advantage of your generosity for years. You were the only one who offered real help, I told her. Everyone else had excuses, conditions, or just flat out refused. Susan sighed deeply. People show you who they really are when giving becomes inconvenient or costly. I learned that lesson the hard way myself many years ago. What do you mean? She set down her glass and folded her hands in her lap, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. Did I ever tell you the real reason my marriage to Mike ended? I shook my head. The family story had always been vague and sanitized. Something about growing apart and wanting different things. I inherited $15,000 when my grandmother die retry NT continue edit D. It wasn't a fortune, but it was significant money for us at the time. More than either of us had ever had at once. Mike immediately had all these grand plans for how we should spend it. He wanted to invest in his friend's restaurant, buy a new truck, take a vacation to Hawaii. I wanted to be more careful with it. Maybe save most of it for a down payment on a small house someday. She smiled sadly at the memory. We fought about it for months. He kept saying I was being selfish, that married couples were supposed to make financial decisions together, that I was treating him like he didn't matter. One day, I came home from work and discovered he'd forged my signature and withdrawn almost all of the money from my account. I was stunned. I'd had no idea. By the time I found out, it was already gone. Invested in that restaurant, which failed within 8 months. When I confronted him about it, do you know what he said? That it was our money, not just mine, and he had every right to make decisions about our financial future, as if my grandmother's love and my name on that inheritance check meant absolutely nothing. I'm so sorry, Susan. I had no idea that's what happened. It was a long time ago, but it taught me something crucial about money and relationships. She looked directly at me, her eyes serious and kind. Money doesn't just reveal who other people truly are, Madison. It reveals who we are too. How we use it, how we share it, how we think about it, how we talk about it. It's like a mirror that shows everyone's real character. Her words resonated more deeply than she could possibly know. In that moment, I made another decision. One that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. Susan, there's something else I need to tell you, something even bigger. I took a shaky breath. 3 weeks ago, I won the lottery, $52 million. Her eyes widened, but she didn't gasp or exclaim or react dramatically. She just sat quietly, processing this information with the same thoughtful calm she'd shown when I'd confessed about the fake job loss. Oh, Madison, she said softly. That's absolutely life-changing. I haven't told anyone else. Not my parents, not Emma or Tyler, not even Casey. You're the very first person to know. And that's why you did the test, she said. Understanding immediately. You needed to know who would be there for you without knowing about the money. Exactly. I needed to understand who actually cares about me as a person versus who would suddenly become very interested in my well-being if they knew I was rich. Susan nodded slowly. That was very smart, honey. Very wise. But what are you planning to do now? I honestly don't know. The money is secure. I have excellent financial advisors, but I have no idea how to handle relationships with the family. Do I tell them? Do I keep it secret forever? Do I cut them off completely? You know something, Madison. You don't owe anyone anything, not even me. This is your money, your life, your choice. But I want to help you, I said urgently. Your medical expenses, your car, your apartment. You gave me everything you had when you thought I needed it. She smiled gently and reached over to pat my hand. Sweetheart, I don't need anything from you. I'm genuinely happy with my life exactly as it is. My apartment is small, but it's filled with things and memories I love. My car makes funny noises, but it gets me where I need to go. I have my books, my students at the library, my little garden on the fire escape. She paused, looking thoughtful. Just knowing that you're secure and happy and never have to worry about money again, that would be more than enough for me. That's all I've ever wanted for you. Her complete lack of self-interest, even knowing I had millions of dollars, brought fresh tears to my eyes. Here was someone who had literally given me her life savings when she thought I was desperate. And now she was asking for absolutely nothing in return when she knew I could afford to give her anything she wanted. A few days later, I decided it was time to face the rest of my family. I called everyone and invited them to my apartment for what I described as an important announcement about my job situation and my future plans. To my surprise, everyone agreed to come. My parents, step-parents, siblings, even Tyler, who'd been completely ignoring my messages for over a week. As they all crowded into my small living room on Sunday afternoon, looking around with varying degrees of curiosity, judgment, and barely concealed impatience, I stood before them feeling strangely calm and centered. "Thank you all for coming," I began. "I know there have been some rumors and conversations going around about my financial situation, and I wanted to address everything directly and honestly." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Tyler suddenly became very interested in his phone. Emma and Jennifer exchanged meaningful glances. "The truth is, I'm completely fine. Better than fine, actually. I found a new position with significantly better pay and benefits, and I'll be transitioning to that job within the next month." Relief was immediately visible on several faces around the room. They'd clearly come expecting either to be asked for money again or perhaps to stage some kind of intervention about my supposedly poor financial planning. Instead, they were getting good news that required absolutely nothing from them. "So what was all that drama about needing money?" my dad asked, his tone already becoming accusatory. "Why did you call everyone asking for help if you had something lined up?" I met his gaze steadily, feeling calmer and more confident than I'd felt in years. Because when I thought I was in real trouble, I reached out to my family for help. That's what family is supposed to be for, right? Supporting each other during difficult times. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. "Well, we all have our own financial commitments and responsibilities," Jennifer said defensively. "It's not always possible to help other people, even when we might want to." "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "We all have to make choices about our priorities and what matters most to us." I turned to look directly at my dad. "For example, Dad, you offered me $500 with interest and a payment schedule, while lecturing me about financial responsibility, but you borrowed $2,000 from me for truck repairs last year and never paid back a penny. And somehow, you found money for a Caribbean cruise right after I helped you out." His face reddened, but he didn't respond. I looked at Jennifer. "You told me this was a learning opportunity and suggested I should have planned better for emergencies instead of offering any actual support." Then to Tyler, "You promised to help and then completely disappeared while posting Instagram stories from expensive concerts and restaurants." To Emma, "You offered $100 while planning a European vacation that probably cost more than I make in 6 months." "I think you're being really unfair," my dad protested. "We all have our own responsibilities and financial obligations." "You're absolutely right," I said calmly, "and I've learned a lot about what those priorities actually are." I turned to Susan, who had been sitting quietly through this entire exchange. The only person who understood what family really means was Aunt Susan. She gave me more help than everyone else in this room combined, despite having far less ability to afford it. Susan looked embarrassed by the attention, but I continued. She didn't lecture me or attach conditions to her help. She didn't make me feel ashamed for needing assistance. She just helped because that's what you do for people you love. The meeting ended exactly as awkwardly as I'd expected, with most of my family leaving in uncomfortable silence. Some tried to justify their responses or make excuses. Others seemed genuinely angry that I'd called them out publicly. But I felt an enormous sense of closure and relief. I hadn't told them about the lottery winnings, but I had finally stood up for myself and set clear boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept from them going forward. That was exactly 1 year ago today. My life now is completely unrecognizable from that exhausted, financially stressed person who bought lottery tickets every Friday as her only source of hope. I did quit my job at the hospital, but not immediately. I gave them 6 months' notice and helped train my replacement. Now I run a nonprofit organization called Second Family Foundation, which provides support services for elderly people who don't have family nearby or whose families aren't involved in their lives. We offer medical bill assistance, home repair services, transportation to appointments, and companionship programs. The work is incredibly rewarding in ways my nursing career never was, though I love that too. I bought a modest but comfortable house in Boulder, nothing ostentatious or attention-grabbing, just a place with good natural light and space for a garden. Susan lives just 3 blocks away in a charming little cottage that we found together. Her diabetes is now perfectly controlled with proper medication and regular monitoring, and she's retired from the library to volunteer with my foundation full-time. She runs our most popular program, therapeutic gardening sessions for seniors that combine physical activity, social interaction, and the joy of growing things. Casey eventually joined our organization as program coordinator, bringing her nursing expertise to our medical assistance and advocacy work. Our weekly wine nights now happen on my back patio instead of in cramped coffee shops, and she's become the voice of reason for both my personal life and our professional mission. As for my family relationships, they've evolved into something much more distant but also more honest and peaceful. I maintain polite, surface-level contact with most of them. Birthday phone calls, holiday cards, the occasional group gathering. But the pretense of closeness and emotional intimacy has completely fallen away. Without the expectation of deep family bonds that had never actually existed, our interactions became far less painful and disappointing. None of them know about my lottery winnings. As far as they're concerned, I simply found success and fulfillment in nonprofit work, which they seem to accept without much curiosity about funding sources or operational details. Their lack of interest in the specifics of my life tells me everything I need to know about their genuine concern for my well-being. There have been moments of temptation to reveal the truth, particularly when Tyler called 6 months ago asking for money to fund yet another business opportunity, or when Emma complained on social media about the cost of her kitchen renovation. But each time, I remembered the silence and rejection when I had genuinely needed help, and the choice became clear. Interestingly, there have been several occasions when family members actually did need assistance, and I've been able to help anonymously. When my dad had a mild heart attack and faced unexpected medical bills not covered by insurance, I made an anonymous donation through the hospital's patient assistance fund. When Tyler finally got serious about his drinking problem and entered a residential treatment program, I quietly covered the costs through a scholarship fund for uninsured patients. They never knew the source of these gifts, and I preferred it that way. The most important thing I learned wasn't really about my family, though. It was about myself and what I'd been doing wrong in relationships for years. Before winning the lottery, I had unconsciously defined my worth by what I could give to other people. I constantly tried to earn love and acceptance through sacrifice and generosity, allowing myself to be used because I believed that was what family meant, what love required. Now I understand that genuine love, the kind Susan has always shown me, doesn't keep a running balance sheet of favors and debts. It gives freely without expectation of return, but it also respects boundaries and maintains dignity. It's honest and consistent, present during good times and bad times alike. Susan and I have dinner together at least twice a week, and our conversations range from silly daily observations to deep philosophical discussions about life, purpose, and what really matters. Last week, as we sat on her front porch watching the sunset and sharing a bottle of wine, she said something that really stuck with me. You know what still amazes me about this whole experience? How differently everything could have turned out if you'd announced your lottery win right away instead of testing people first. I nodded, imagining that alternate reality. The family would have suddenly become very attentive and loving, I'm sure. Lots of concern about my happiness and well-being. Exactly, Susan said. And you would never have known what was real versus what was motivated by money. That knowledge, as painful as it was to acquire, gave you the freedom to make authentic choices about your relationships. She was absolutely right. The experiment had been emotionally brutal, but it had also been illuminating in ways I never could have anticipated. It showed me clearly who deserved a place in my new life and who didn't. It revealed the true nature of relationships I had spent years trying to strengthen and repair, despite their fundamental imbalance and dishonesty. Most importantly, it taught me that the people who truly love you will support and help you when you have nothing to offer in return. The people who don't will disappoint and abandon you no matter how much you have to give them. If you're watching this video and recognizing some of your own family patterns, I want you to trust your instincts. You don't need to win millions of dollars to test people's character. Life will do that for you eventually, in ways both large and small. The goal isn't to punish people for failing your tests or to prove how terrible they are. The goal is to protect yourself and your energy by understanding who people really are beneath the surface. Have you ever discovered something about your family or friends that completely changed how you saw them? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences might help someone else who's struggling with similar situations. And if this story helped you see your own relationships more clearly, or gave you permission to set better boundaries with people who take advantage of your kindness, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. Money didn't change who I was or who my family members were. It simply gave me the clarity and courage to see what had always been there, hidden beneath years of obligation, guilt, and misplaced loyalty. And sometimes, that kind of clarity is the most valuable gift you can give yourself. The people who deserve to be in your life will love and support you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. Everyone else is just taking up space that belongs to your real family, the people who choose to love you unconditionally.